Hi, third grade. I'm back with a couple more chapters of On the Banks of Plum Creek. We are up to chapter 9. So I'm going to read you chapter 9 and 10 today. I hope you guys are doing okay. All right, enjoy. Okay, here we go. Chapter 9 is called Grasshopper Weather. Now, plums were ripening in the wild plum thickets all along Plum Creek. Plum trees were low trees. They grew close together in many little scraggly branches all strung with thin-skinned, juicy plums. Around them, the air was sweet and sleepy, and wings hummed. Pa was plowing all the land across the creek where he had cut the hay, early before the sun came up, and when Laura went to drive Spot to meet the cattle at the gray boulder, Pete and Bright were gone from the stable. Pa had yoked them to the plow, and they had gone to work. When Laura and Mary had washed the breakfast dishes, they took in the tin pails and went to pick plums. From the top of their houses, they could see Pa plowing. The oxen and the plow and Pa crawled slowly along a curve on the prairie. They looked very small, and a little smoke of dust blew away from the plow. Every day, the velvety dark brown patch of plow grew bigger. It ate up the silvery gold stubble field beyond the haystacks. It spread over the prairie waves. It was going to be a very big wheat field, and when someday Pa cut the wheat, he and Ma and Laura and Mary would have everything they could ever think of. They would have a house and horses and candy every day when Pa made a wheat crop. Laura went wading through the tall grass to the plum thickets by the creek. Her sunbonnet hung down her back, and she swung her tin pail. The grasses were crisply yellow now, and dozens of little grasshoppers jumped crackling away from Laura's swishing feet. Mary came walking behind in the path Laura made, and she kept her sunbonnet on. When they came to a plum thicket, they sat down with their big pails. They filled their pails with plums and emptied them. They filled the little pails with plums and emptied them into the big pails until the big pails were full. They carried the big pails back to the roof of the dugout. On the clean grass, Ma spread out clean cloths, and Laura and Mary laid the plums on the cloths to dry in the sun. Next winter, they would have dry plums to eat. The shade of the plum thickets was a thin shade. Sunshine flickered between the narrow leaves overhead. The little branches sagged with their weight of plums, and plums had fallen and rolled together between drifts of long grass underfoot. Some were smashed, some were smooth and perfect, and some had cracked open, showing their juicy yellow inside. Bees and hornets stood thick along the crack, sucking up the juices with all their might. Their scaly little tails wiggled with joy. They were too busy and too happy to sting. When Laura poked them with a blade of grass, they only moved a step and did not stop sucking up that good plum juice. Laura put all the good plums in her pail, but she flicked the hornets off the cracked plums with her fingernail and quickly popped the plum into her mouth. It was sweet and warm and juicy. The hornets buzzed around her in dismay. They did not know what had become of their plum, but in a minute they pushed into the crowd, sucking at another one. "I declare you eat more plums than you pick," Mary said. "I don't either, any such thing," Laura contradicted. "I pick up every plum I eat." "You know very well what I mean," Mary said. "You just play around while I work." But Laura filled her big pail as quickly as Mary filled hers. Mary was cross because she would rather sew or read than pick plums. But Laura hated to sit still. She liked picking plums. She liked to shake the trees. You must know exactly how to shake a plum tree. If you shake it too hard, the green plums fall, and that wastes them. If you shake it too softly, you do not get all the ripe plums. In the night, they will fall, and some will smash and be wasted. Laura learned exactly how to shake a plum tree. She held its scaling rough bowl and shook it. One gentle, quick shake. Every plum swung on its stem, and all around they fell, pattering. Then one more jerk while the plums were swinging, and the last ripe ones fell. Plump, 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 plump. There were many kinds of plums. When the red ones were all picked, the yellow ones were ripe. Then the blue ones, the largest of all, the very last. They were the frost plums. They would not ripen until after the frost. One morning, the whole world was delicately silvered. Every blade of grass was silvery, and the path had a thin sheen. It was hot like fire under Laura's bare feet, and they left dark footprints in it. The air was cold in her nose, and her breath steamed. So did Spot's. When the sun came up, the whole prairie sparkled. Millions of teeny sparks of color blazed on the grasses. That day, the frost plums were ripe. They were large purple plums, and all over their purple was a silvery, thin sheen, like frost. The sun was not so hot now, and the nights were chilly. The prairie was almost the tawny color of the haystacks. The smell of the air was different, and the sky was not so sharply blue. Still, the sunshine was warm at noon. There was no rain, and there were no more frosts. It was almost Thanksgiving, and there was still no snow. I don't know what to make of it, Pa said. I never saw weather like this. Nelson says the old-timers call this grasshopper weather. Whatever do they mean by that? Ma asked. Pa shook his head. You can't prove it by me. Grasshopper weather was what Nelson said. I couldn't make out what he meant by it. Likely it's some old Norwegian saying, Ma said. Laura liked the sound of the words, and when she ran through the crackling prairie grass and saw the grasshoppers jumping, she sang to herself, grasshopper weather, grasshopper weather. Okay, so now we're on to chapter 10, and it's called Cattle in the Hay. Summer was gone, and winter was coming, and now it was time for Pa to make a trip to town. Here in Minnesota, town was so near that Pa would only be gone one day, and Ma was going with him. She took Carrie, because Carrie was too little to be left far from Ma. But Laura and Mary were big girls. Mary was going on 9, and Laura was going on 8, so they could stay at home and take care of everything while Pa and Ma were gone. For going to town, Ma made a new dress for Carrie from the pink calico that Laura had worn when she was little. There was enough of it to make Carrie a little sunbonnet, too. Carrie's hair had been in curl papers all night. It hung in long golden round curls, and when Ma tied the pink sunbonnet strings under Carrie's chin, Carrie looked like a rose. Ma wore her hoop skirts and her best dress, the beautiful chalice with little strawberries on it that she had worn to the sugar dance at Grandpa's long ago in the big woods. Now, be good girls, Laura and Mary, was the last thing she said. She was up on the wagon seat with Carrie beside her. Their lunch was in the wagon. Pa took up the ox goad. We'll be back before sundown, he promised. Hi-oop, he said to Pete and Bright. The big ox and the little one leaned into their yoke, and the wagon started away. Goodbye, Pa. Goodbye, Ma. Goodbye, Carrie. Goodbye, goodbye, Laura and Mary called after the wagon. Slowly the wagon went away. Pa walked beside the oxen. Ma and Carrie, the wagon, and Pa all grew smaller and smaller till they were gone in the prairie. The prairie seemed big and empty now, but there was nothing to be afraid of. There were no wolves and no Indians. Besides, Jack stayed close to Laura. Jack was a responsible dog. He knew that he must take care of everything when Pa was away. That morning, Mary and Laura played by the creek among the rushes. They did not go near the swimming hole. They did not touch the straw stack. At noon, they ate the corn dodgers and molasses and drank the milk that Ma had left for them. They washed their tin cups and put them away. Then Laura went to play on the big rock, but Mary wanted to stay in the dugout. She said that Laura must stay there too. Ma can make me, Laura said, but you can't. I can so, said Mary. When Ma's not here, you have to do what I say because I'm older. You have to let me have my way because I'm littler, said Laura. That's Carrie. It isn't you, Mary told her. And if you don't do what I say, I'll tell Ma. I guess I can play where I want to, said Laura. Mary grabbed at her, but Laura was too quick. She darted out, and she would have run up the path, but Jack was in the way. He stood stiff, looking across the creek. Laura looked too, and she screeched, Mary! The cattle were all around Pa's haystacks. They were eating the hay. They were tearing into the stacks with their great horns, gouging out hay, eating it and trampling over it. There would be nothing left to feed Pete and Bright and Spot in the wintertime. Jack knew what to do. He ran growling down the steps to the footbridge. Pa was not there to save the haystacks. They must drive those cattle away. Oh, we can't, Mary said, scared. But Laura ran behind Jack, and Mary came after her. They went over the creek and past the spring. They came up on the prairie, and now they saw the fierce big cattle were quite near. The long horns were gouging, and the thick legs were trampling and jostling, and their wide mouths were bawling. Mary was too scared to move. Laura was too scared to stand still. She jerked Mary along. She saw a stick and grabbed it up and ran, yelling at the cattle. Jack ran at them too, growling. A big red cow swiped at him with her horns, but he jumped behind her. She snorted and galloped. All the other cattle ran, humping and jostling after her, and Jack and Laura and Mary ran after them. But they could not chase those cattle away from the haystacks. The cattle ran around and in between the stacks, jostling and bawling, tearing off hay and trampling it. More and more hay slid off the stacks. Laura ran panting and yelling, waving her stick. The faster she ran, the faster the cattle went. Black and brown and red, brindle and spotted cattle, big with awful horns, and they would not stop wasting that hay. Some tried to climb over the toppling stacks. Laura was hot and dizzy, her hair unbraided and blue in her eyes. Her throat was rough from yelling, but she kept on yelling, running and waving her big stick. She was too scared to hit one of those big horned cows. More and more, the hay kept coming down, and faster they trampled over it. Suddenly, Laura turned around and ran the other way. She faced the big red cow coming around a haystack. The huge legs and shoulders and terrible horns were coming fast. Laura could not scream now, but she jumped at that cow and waved her stick. The cow tried to stop, but all the other cattle were coming behind her, and she couldn't. She swerved and ran away across the plowed ground, and all the others galloping after her. Jack and Laura and Mary chased them farther and farther away from the hay. Far into the high prairie grasses, they chased those cattle. Johnny Johnson rose out of the prairie, rubbing his eyes. He had been asleep in a warm hollow of grass. "Johnny, Johnny," Laura screeched, "wake up and watch the cattle." "You better," Mary told him. Johnny Johnson looked at the cattle grazing in the deep grass, and then he looked at Laura and Mary and Jack. He did not know what happened, and they could not tell him because the only words he knew were Norwegian. They went back through the high grass that dragged at their trembling legs. They were glad to drink at the spring. They were glad to be in the quiet dugout and sit down to rest. Wow. Okay, I wonder what's going to happen now. That was chapter 10. So next time I'll read you guys chapter 11. Okay, miss you all. Hope you're enjoying the story. Write some comments. I want to know what you guys think and who's listening. Okay, bye.